yesterday was really cold inside my house. I was running the heater for a little bit, and when I went to go pick up the kids, I leave the house at 1:30 to go pick up the kids, and my next door neighbor was outside, and I guess she was on a conference call. She works from home too, and she was just out there enjoying the sun because our houses are so cold, but it's 70 degrees outside, and it was a lot warmer outside than it is inside. With all the insulation, new windows. I mean, it's a new house, obviously, but yeah, definitely keeping the temperature nice inside, but too cold. It was helpful, when I live in a city where it's really hot in the summer, and it's potential to be hot in the winter also. Unlike, I'm I'm in the San Diego County, but near San Diego City, whereas Brent is he's near the water and stuff, and so our temperatures are going to be 15 to 20 degrees different.
Oh, really? It's that drastic?
Yeah, I'm probably 15 miles east, bird's eye view, something like that. Yeah, it gets really hot, and we're in a valley, so I think that the heat just gets trapped there.
Yeah, we don't get that big temperature fluctuations in South Florida. It's just, hey, you know what? If it's 81 by me, west is just going to be a little bit warmer or a little bit cooler depending on the time of year. I mean, just a couple degrees.
Yeah, we had to hit 113 degrees in I think it's August, mid-August. Oh, so hot. That's not normal. It was a huge heat wave. I think even Brent's area was hot, but not that hot.
Yeah, we don't get that much. Well, maybe with the heat index, occasionally we'll see that. But.
Yeah. All right, let's get started. And I don't have the answer to Carlos's questions right off the bat, and I can't remember. I'm going to ask it anyway. If doing a delete on a table versus truncate table for a heap, will they behave the same for freenet pages? Will index physical stats DMV look the same afterwards? It's a vendor database. He doesn't own the schema. I can't remember for heaps. I'm a clustered index table type person, and I know a lot of the ins and outs of heaps, but that's one I don't have memorized. I don't know. Do you remember, Richie?
I don't think there's a huge difference between the two. It might, if you had to, if this was on a test, I'd be like, yeah, I think they look the same.
I know that there's some issue with deletes on heaps because we have an alert and blitz index for it, and I didn't quite understand what it meant. And Eric has moved it as a lower priority items further down, whereas the forwarded fetches on heaps are bad. I think it has something to do with the no other tables can use that space, but the heap table can reuse that space. I'm sure we have blog posts out there on it. If you run SQ Blitz Index mode 4, maybe mode 0, but probably mode 4 will let you know which tables have the deletes, and see that there should be a URL in that row. Click on that and you'll learn more about deletes on heaps.
Wow, I did not know that. See, even I can learn something.
I look at Blitz Index stuff, day to day as part of the client engagements. It's a row that I kind of ignore though.
I've been looking into Blitz cache code the last couple of days.
I've seen your questions in Slack. I'm like, uh-oh.
Like, what is going on here, people?
That's one I will not open. I've contributed a couple of changes, I think, to Blitz, and I don't think any other ones I've opened. But Blitz cache, that's a hard no. There's no way I'm looking at that.
Yeah, I found one of the queries for non-sargable stuff, and I'm like, I don't think this will ever catch anything. I'm pretty sure that this is wrong, and I'm going to go the route that I know will capture something.
All right. Marco asks, some quick start documentation for SQL DBA that they want to start on it. Oh, for Kubernetes and Docker.
And Dockers. Ooh. You're talking to the wrong clan here. I don't think any of us have actually played with Kubernetes or Dockers. If I wanted to learn about Kubernetes and Dockers, not necessarily for a SQL DBA, but just as a technologist, I'd probably first go to Pluralsight because they distill a lot of those presenters. They distill the information pretty well, and they've been in the technology. So if I needed to learn something really quick and I didn't want to read a whole bunch of documentation, white papery type stuff, I would go to Pluralsight first, and then if something that the speaker was talking about that I want to dive into a little bit more, then I would go off to the different places on the internet and look for other people to talk about stuff. But that's how I go. That's how I roll.
All right. Theo asked a long question about backups, encryption, TDE, and it's too long of a question for me to read, and I don't think that either of us can answer it. It's just not something that we focus on at Brent Ozar Unlimited. I don't think Brent or Eric would want to answer this question either. So ask that question, Theo, on Stack Exchange instead. Jeremy asked, what are your thoughts on using containers in a production environment? I don't really have any thoughts. I don't really care.
It's the same question I have for any technology in a production environment. Why, right? What is your reasoning for using a container in a production environment? I mean, is it for ease of setup? Or we have multiple servers all over the place where you just want to deploy really quickly and have that? I mean, if that's the case, then yeah, there's got to be a reason, not because it's the cool new hotness, right? And everyone's doing it. That's not a good reason. There needs to be a firm technical reason on why you want to get in, have some sort of container in a production environment. So yeah, answer that question.
All right. Joshua asks, BOU, Brent Ozar Unlimited offers training on multiple paths. Other vendors do the same. Is there a path you would most recommend to a new DBA with admin focus and not development focus? Which skills would you focus on and why?
Well, I would suggest you go development and not DBA admin, because I'm a developer and that's where I would want to go.
I mean, we do have the fundamentals of DBA course. I think those are all Eric's modules, I'm pretty sure. You start there as far as, I don't know, I'm not good with.
Start there.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Yeah, how to think like the SQL Server engine. Start there, and then wherever Terra else is gonna lead you.
Well, I don't learn very well in the method of taking classes. When I really jumped my skill set, it was because I was being very active online in forums, and for questions I didn't know the answer to, I would look them up and see if I could figure out the answer, and then I would play around in Management Studio and see if I could figure it out. So I learned a lot by doing, and so a lot of my experience came from test environments and then later production environments. Obviously, if you don't have if you're really a junior DBA and you don't have the access to production, possibly that might be harder to do. But I really get my skills from doing rather than listening to people talk about it. Tashal asks, we have a few tables that have foreign keys that are not trusted, and I run this command alter table with check constraint go, but still seeing that the key is not trusted after the alter completed successfully. Ooh, that's an interesting question. Check the query. I mean, I imagine it's our query, our script from our foreign key trusted post, but not sure. Not sure if that's a bug in the script or something else went wrong. Ask that question on Stack Exchange also after checking the script. Chuck asks, current server has 160 gigabytes of RAM allocated for SQL instance. We feel that the server was purchased to spend money out of a budget. I love servers like that. Now the server has to be replaced with limited budget. Uh-oh. How does one go about determining how much RAM the server actually needs? I wouldn't be wanting to give that up. I mean, as a production DBA, there's just no way. I mean, I might be okay with having lesser cores, especially if it's Enterprise Edition, because that's where it really costs a lot of money for a server, the licensing aspect. But RAM, I don't know that I want. I mean, it just depends on what your system needs. It's not something that we can really answer. I've worked for companies that have performance load test teams. And I mean, that's something we could test in our load test environment where we're replaying a production load or a synthetic load there, and we could see, we could reduce the RAM there. I don't think I've ever done that test though, because I've never gone down, only up. But 160 gigabytes isn't that big of a server these days. I would look at your processors instead if it were me to reduce costs.
I think that's going to be a more valid question as more and more servers start, inching up to the cloud, because once we start lowering our memory and our CPU, we start saving money.
Yeah.
So I think it's a valid question, and it's up to, hey, what is your app doing? How frequently is it doing it? How your queries look, because if you have bad queries, ill-performing queries, they're going to have more resources, more memory, more CPU, more of everything. So I mean, your system, and you could take a look and see what it's doing when, and just monitor it and see, hey, what are the times that all this stuff is going on, and do we need more, or can we actually back it down a little bit?
Yeah, especially in the cloud where you can't really just add RAM. You have to go up in size, and that gives you more processors and more RAM.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really valid point that you made.
Yep, I make one once a day. Thank you, guys.
That's it. You're done. Done for the day. All right, I'm gonna murder this person's name. Xiaoyan asks, a SQL agent job executes 2 store procedures. Is there a default timeout setting? How to make sure it can run for 60 minutes without timeout? There is no default setting in SQL Server. That is imposed by applications. I'm sure, I don't know if there's even a setting you could change in the agent jobs. Well, you can, if you wanted to, you can have it stop after a certain amount of time. But you're asking the opposite, how to make sure it can run to completion, basically, and you don't have to make any changes to do that. I mean, I've had some jobs run over 24 hours, and they just keep on running. Now, those are going to be like check DBs on very large databases, but you're good to go. Just set up a job, and it should not have any problems. Continuing to execute at least. All right, Julie asks, setting SQL memory min and max to the same value. Why would you or would not want to do this? Corporate policy. So I think that in some version of SQL Server, and I've never encountered this, but I know about 2.5 years ago, I think it was Doug that mentioned we had a client that had min and max set to the same thing, and so I learned something that day that he was remembering some kind of bug where it would wipe out the plan cache. It's just some odd thing was happening. It was just a bug when min and max were set to the same. So I would imagine whatever version that is, that it was a bug and it has been fixed, but I don't know that there's any benefit to having min and max set to the same thing. On the systems where that I've supported where we've changed the min value, normally I don't change the min value, but when we have changed the min value is because we were in a clustered environment, and on failover we wanted to make sure that I'm talking about a multi-instance failover. On failover of it, let's say we have 2 nodes and 2 instances, one on each node, active, and if a failover occurs for whatever reason, we wanted to make sure that instance that had to do the failover, because there's the server crash or whatever, it could get some amount of memory. So by setting the min, that would allow it to steal some. I don't know that there's any other benefit to it. SQL Server is not going to automatically allocate that min right off the bat anyway on restart. It takes some time to build up to that. I don't know that there's any reason not to do it, except within mind that there may be some bug in some version, and I could be completely murdering on this anyway. Sheila asks, how can I prove CPU pressure to management using the Power BI report using the blitz prox? Performance keeps getting worse, and only difference is a query using 5 execution plans, third-party code. I mean, CPU pressure is easy. You just pull up, perfmon or a task manager, and you can see it, the little graph there. Also in SQL Server for weight stats, you'd be looking for soft schedule yield weights. That's a good indication. So using blitz first, and blitz will let you know towards the bottom of the output if you do have high waiting time on soft schedule yield weights. But that's the weight stat to keep it in mind. As far as Power BI, I'm not the right person to answer that. I think Brent's really the only one that could answer that part of it. The fact that it queries using 5 execution plans isn't really a problem. I mean, certainly ad hoc queries that have thousands of execution plans, that can be problematic, but one with 5 execution plans is not. I would be looking at other things. I would be looking at the weight stats. I mean, of course, CPU utilization, I/O, that type of stuff, but start with the weight stats, and that's what tells you where to go next. Look at your indexes. Blitz index mode 0, looking for high priority items, and then blitz cache. I would be sorting by, so blitz cache sort order equals, and then I would start with CPU, average CPU, maybe look at memory grant, depending on what version of SQL Server you're on. I don't know that the Power BI stuff is sufficient to actively troubleshoot the issue. All right. Pam asks, we recently experienced corruption in 2 databases on indexes. Our developers are very fond of using the no-lock hint, and I've read in past versions there is a bug that can cause corruption. Does this still hold true for SQL Server 2016? I would imagine it does not. I am not a fan of no-lock hints. Where data accuracy matters, you cannot use it. Period. End of story. I'm not aware of it causing corruption in the past, but I'm sure that you're right. Brent and Eric would probably have that type of stuff memorized. I would seriously doubt that it would still exist in 2016 or even any recent version of SQL Server, because that's pretty serious, because a lot of people are using no-locks out there. I mean, I don't even know what the percentage is in the world, but I'd say it's a pretty big percentage.
Too damn high. And as a developer, as a DBA going to a developer, you need to ask them, why are you using a no-lock? And if they probably don't understand actually what's going on in the back end with the no-lock stuff, and then you can let them know. It's like, well, you can get wrong data, and you can get duplicate data, and there's all this other fun stuff that they probably don't know about. And then you could start thinking, well, if we really need this kind of stuff, maybe we need to go to our CSI on the database and get rid of all this no-locky stuff.
Exactly. Fix the root cause of the problem. No-lock should not be the turbo button in SQL Server.
Yeah,
it still takes no-locks anyway.
And it's really just a misunderstanding on the developer's side of what no-lock does. I've done it intentionally, right? Hey, this is the reason why we need to use no-lock. Boom, 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 boom. And there's no, and in this particular instance, we had a heap, and there was no inserts going on at the time, and there was a reason why we did it, and we decided to do it. But I wouldn't do it without a specific reason, and going through that thought process of what no-lock does and what it buys you while the system is going on in a certain time set or whatnot.
John asks, I need to set up regular patching of my SQL servers. To be safe, is it just getting a good backup, or is there a best practice, tips, tricks that you would recommend?
Ooh.
I always know that my backups are okay. I mean, I've worked in large organizations with tons of SQL Server, lots of monitoring, all this type of stuff, and we're restoring our backups. I have that stuff automated for our important systems. So I never specifically run a backup before I start my patching. I mean, certainly, you could do that. But when you're talking about 16 terabyte databases, you're probably not going to run a backup before you start patching, unless you've got some kind of snapshot utility going. But making sure your backups are valid, and then most of my systems would have log backups running every 5 to 15 minutes anyway. So that is a backup occurring before patching starts. But start in your test environment. You need to make sure that your system is okay with these service packs, cumulative update packages, because some service packs and CUs have caused problems with certain things. So do your testing. Donald says, explain sargability once more, please. So sargability is a made-up word in the database world. Stands for search. So sargable, search argumentable. So sargable. There's even a Wikipedia page. This is, it's not just a SQL Server thing. This is a relational database thing. So we want our where clauses and join conditions, our search predicates to be sargable to allow SQL Server to pick, to be able to pick an index seek, for instance, instead of a scan. When our search predicates are not sargable, meaning that they're non-sargable, SQL Server may have to scan the index, even if an index even exists for the column where the sargability issues is happening. It may have to do a scan there. Now, sometimes you won't see a scan because in the search predicates there could be other filtering that can occur. Maybe you have those things indexed, and so by the time it gets to this search predicate that is not sargable, it has less work to do. So it's not scanning anything. It's just doing that work after it has already filtered down to a certain amount of rows. So an example of a non-sargable search predicate is like using rtrim, ltrim, cast convert. Some dates don't have the issue. Some dates things don't have sargability issues, but casting out to get or converting out to get the year, that would have a problem times. Functions, implicit conversions is an example. Anytime you wrap a column with a function, the built-in functions, that is going to be a problem. And we're talking about where clauses, join conditions, where your filtering is going on. I don't care what you do in the select statements. Although if it's in a view and it's in the select statement, that becomes a problem because your outer query may be using that column in the select as a where clause. So it gets a little tricky when you start nesting things down. But lots of information out there on sargability. You can even start on the Wikipedia page to learn some more about it. It's a very common problem out there.
Yeah. And in fact, this is what I was adding to Constant Care this week. So we're going through all the query plans, and then we're saying, okay, do you have any non-sargable predicates that are in there? And I actually had to work backwards. I had to work from the XML and create the queries to generate that XML so we could test all this stuff out. So it's a problem, and soon Constant Care will tell you that you have a problem, and you should seek help.
Mark asks, can you recommend any free cloud SQL servers for people to try their hand in Cloud DB? I don't know if there's anything out there, because I know even like in Microsoft Azure, the Microsoft MVPs get very, very limited free stuff.
I think they get a $150 credit a month,
something like that. It's very low, and I guess a lot of the presenters, they use that up in like the first day, so you have to be very careful. Yeah, you have to pay to use the cloud, and there isn't really a test version of the cloud or production version of the cloud. You're paying. Now, of course, you can get a smaller server. There are some. You can get a pretty small server.
Yeah. So I mean, I think what most people do is that they have their own Azure account and it's tied to their own credit card. They'll go ahead and spin up a database. They'll load their data, or maybe their database is already there. They load it from a backup. They'll go ahead and run that stuff, and then when they're done, they'll turn it back off. And that way, they're not incurring the monthly cost of Azure DB or RDS or whatever craziness that's going on. And they also had a very low tier. And so I think a lot of our costs when we do training are we put them up in a higher tier. So in the cloud, they have their own SQL Server databases. I mean, that's one of the advantages of training with us, because we give you all the environments and the labs and stuff like that. You got hands-on stuff, which is pretty darn cool, if you ask me.
Yeah. Theo asks, we have a SQL Server that gives a memory error at random times, like failed to release contiguous memory, blah, blah, blah. Oh, boy. If I was getting that error, I would be, doing the hardware checks. I would probably be opening a case with Microsoft, checking with the vendor of the hardware. You might have corruption issues. Memory errors like that, as far as I know, that's a bad one. You might have a bad module. I would definitely look into it more, and hopefully you've got some kind of high availability set up for the system so that you can fail over to another server while you work on whatever problem. It sounds like a hardware problem to me, and you might have some database corruption. So hopefully, maybe you don't. Hopefully you have DBCC check DB running at times to know whether or not you have corruption or not. Mark says, if we disable constraints of a foreign key, we could insert faster, right? But if we enabled again, but not with check, then what is the process or workflow of the insert? Is scan all table to know what is the position, or if match the constraint? I mean, certainly if you disable constraints, it's going to help things out. But the constraints are there for a reason, and having trusted constraints can help you out with your queries, your select statements, because a join elimination can occur. As a matter of fact, I've got a client this week that is having issues with this because they don't have foreign keys in place, or some of them aren't trusted. And so Brent's got a module in his performance tuning class, mastering index tuning class, where he talks about this issue, and he shows you a query in Stack Overflow database. It's like between posts and post types, and if you have the foreign key trusted between the two tables, and you do a query with a join to post types, it doesn't even have to check the post types table in the execution plan, because it can eliminate that and knows that the data is fine in that table, so it doesn't even have to bother hitting that table. So I would do some research on the join elimination topic.
Right. But I mean, if we're doing loads into a table like that to make them faster, you do your checks you do your cleaning of the data first in a staging environment, and then you don't have to worry about, when I put the index back on, is all the data right, and all that, because you've already done it before you've done the load into the data.
All right. Bill asks, have you seen a reference design or template for deploying SSRS into an Azure virtual machine container? I don't think we can answer this question. It was the last question in the queue, so I was going to ask it anyway. I know I skipped a couple of questions because I don't know that we'd have the answer. There was another container question above. Do you have use cases for when to use containers at all memorized, Richie? I don't have that kind of stuff memorized.
Well, in production, I think the question was. No, and I mean, that's something that as a technologist you need to understand the technology. And if you're looking into containers because upper management thinks it's the shiny, cool new thing, then you need to take a look into it and say, okay, well, why would this work in our environment? I mean, it's just not containers. Today it's containers. Tomorrow it's going to be something else.
Yeah.
And this is a continual thing that will happen. So upper management will go to a AWS reInvent or whatever conference it is, a Gartner Summit. They would hear about something really super interesting that, hey, it may save us money down the road, or we could get some value from the business and do all this stuff. And then they hand it off to you to say, okay, well, is this something that we could implement, and how much work and effort, and does it make sense in our environment? And then you have to take a look in that, and then you have to say, okay, well, what is this technology? What does it do, and does it apply to our business environment? And that's part of our job as technologists. So I don't have anything because we haven't done anything with containers, and I don't have anything off the top of my head. There are people in production with SQL Server running containers, and they seem to enjoy it. Otherwise, they'd move off of it. But as of right now, we are not recommending containers for production.
We've got Andy Leonard here. He says he's been looking at containers for testing SSIS, and that's a valid use case. It's not production though. He's blogged about it some, and we'll be blogging more soon. So check out Andy Leonard's.
No, that makes, actually, I could see where he's coming from SSIS perspective. That makes perfect sense. Yeah, I could see from that angle. Mm-hmm.
We don't usually say people's last name, but Andy Leonard's a big deal in the SQL Server community, so that's why I said his name.
Huge.
All right, that's it for the questions today. We will see you guys next week. Bye.